Hi, this is Jerry Conway. I'm the guy who killed Gwen Stacy, and welcome to Fanboy Factor.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Fanboy Factor. I'm Brian Isaacs. With us, as always, is Dave Harriman.
Good evening, everybody.
Mike Hopkins.
Hello.
And JQ.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
And with us today, known forever to fandom as the man who killed off Gwen Stacy, Jerry Conway, also the co-creator of The Punisher, Firestorm, Power Girl, Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, The Jackal, Killer Croc, Tombstone, Tarantula, Count Vertigo, Vaude, Vixen, Commander / Citizen Steel, and many other popular characters for both Marvel and DC Comics. So, welcome, Jerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to say, on behalf of all those characters, I'm glad to be here.
A mouthful. Wow, Jerry, I mean, I was looking
Did we mention The Punisher?
I think so. I hope so. Now, you started writing for Marvel Comics at age 16, is that correct?
Actually, I started writing for DC Comics at age 16, and then went over to Marvel a couple of years later. Well, I did go over to Marvel, but started doing scripts for Marvel a couple of years later.
Now, what was it like working in comics back then, opposed to like some of the stuff today?
Well, I think it was a very, very different market and a very, very different business. You guys have all seen Mad Men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, DC Comics was Mad Men's offices. That's basically what it was. If you went up, literally, Marvel Comics at that time was on Madison Avenue, so their offices literally were, the Mad Men offices. When I look at Draper Cooper or whatever the name of their company is now, I swear it's a sense of deja vu, because the structure of the office, the design of the furniture, everything is exactly what DC was like in 1968. So I was this kid from Queens, when I first started going up there. It was during the summer, I think, of 67. They had these tours of the offices, and I would go up there with a bunch of other guys. A couple of them were people like Marv Wolfman and Len Wein were also part of that crew. And we would wander around, and break off from the tour and go into these offices, and it was like going into Don Draper's office. I mean, Julie Schwartz didn't quite have Don Draper's look, but he wore the same outfit, I mean, it was the same starched white shirt, with a tie, the secretary behind the window, as you came up, was a bouffant blonde. The place it is very surreal, seriously, watching Mad Men now. So if you can imagine, a 15-year-old kid wandering the halls of Draper Cooper, that is kind of what it was like.
A lot of drinking going on back then?
I don't know if there wasn't necessarily a lot of drinking going on there, but there was a lot of drinking going on among the people that I knew. When I finally started hanging out with these guys, on a regular basis, one of my buddies became Denny O'Neil. And Denny was about, I think, 12, 13 years older than I, so he was in his mid to late 20s. And I was 16 years old, and I looked a lot older than I was. And New York had at that time, a drinking age of 18. So we would go to these bars in the area and just hang out there. And I would drink. I mean, Denny was a drinker at that time. He's not anymore. He's like been sober for many years, as have I. But he taught me about Boilermakers. And I used to down like 5 or 6 of those things, in an evening. And these are school nights. I was like drinking with these guys. I have no idea what half of the time what we were saying, but it was pretty intense. It was quite a trip, I got to tell you.
Those were the days.
Yeah, those were the days. So today I can't imagine the same thing happening in any way. It was just not quite the same environment in so many ways. I mean, in a strange sort of way, I think the corporate culture now in the comic book business is closer to the Draper Cooper culture of the 1960s than the comic book business was itself. Because back then, you know, the people of my generation were just sort of coming in. We were the kids. You know how on the show there's the young snots who come in and like come up with all the crazy wild ideas? That was us. You know, we were Peggy's buddies. You know, the ones that Don Draper would stare at and go like, "I don't get you kids, but you clearly know something." You know. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very strange.
I don't even know what to say.
I feel like my life is being relived on AMC every week these days.
Well, going back to those days, I mean, when you were writing, I mean, for example, let's pick a character out of the hat of your tricks here. For example, Atomic Skull, I think was one of yours, right? What was the basis? How did you think about that when you did it? I mean, what was the inspiration behind it?
Okay, now you see, here's where I'm like completely blank. Atomic Skull? I was probably drunk. No, I have no idea. I did a character called Baron Blood, but Atomic Skull, isn't that isn't that a web comic now? I mean, I don't remember the Atomic Skull.
Oh, let's pick another one.
I mean, Baron
The
Blood,
Punisher. I mean, let's go for the non-obscure ones because
okay, Punisher. So when you're sitting there in Punisher, I mean, what was the inspiration? I mean, we know the character's history, but as far as a creator making it up, what were you at that time? Because thinking about Punisher's history, I mean, it seems like a very dark think about and write about.
Yeah, well, the Punisher came out of a period of time when New York was a very dark place. 72, 73, you know, you had a lot of a very great sense that the city was out of control. You know, that you weren't safe walking down the street. The city was in the process of going bankrupt, you know, at that point. A few years later, there was a famous Daily News headline, you know, Ford to city, drop dead. I mean, this is when President Ford refused to help with a bailout, you know, of New York. I mean, these days, these things are all part of, you know, the day-to-day life. You know, we don't think twice about bailouts and things like that. But back then, it was a real sense that the city was falling apart. Plus, we were in the tail end of the Vietnam War, which was not going well, and not going well in a way that was spectacular compared to, say, hello.
Sorry, Mr.
Sorry. So the Vietnam War was not going well in a way that was spectacularly not going well, as opposed to, say, how Afghanistan is not going well. You know, where bad things are happening, but they're not on the news every night. There's not a sense of imminent violence in our own daily lives. I was of draft age, and you know, my number was fairly high up there, and if I hadn't actually turned out to be 4F, you know, I could have ended up, you know, slogging in a rice paddy somewhere, so which would not have been fun, and I would not have been writing The Punisher. So The Punisher came out of that kind of mindset, you know, of darkness and bleakness. And he was, at the time, my intention was to create a character who was going to be a secondary villain, not a primary villain. The primary villain was going to be the Jackal, and I wanted somebody who would be like a way to introduce the Jackal through meeting this character. But as I was writing the character, he seemed much more interesting to me than I thought he was going to be, and ended up fleshing him out and making him, giving him some more tones and more shades than I had actually expected that he would have. So it turned into a character that now has like 40 years worth of stories.
Did you ever think he'd be like almost a cultural icon that he is today?
No, no. We actually thought comics were on the way out. Back in 72, 73, you're looking at a business that had shrunk enormously in just the previous 5 to 10 years. When I first started trying to sell to comics, Superman was selling about 1 million copies a month. This is in 1967.
Right.
By 1972, it was selling 400,000 copies a month.
Wow.
That's a huge drop.
Yeah.
Today, of course, people would kill to sell 400,000 copies. But we were killing off titles that were selling 200,000-300,000 copies. And we were looking at the production costs of putting out a comic book had become very high. The returns were very high. You would publish 200,000 copies and get back 120,000 of them in returns, from distributors, and you're selling them for 10, 20 cents, 25 cents, and this is just not cost effective.
Right.
So we really did think that the business was going to fold up, and we were just glad to be having a chance to write these characters and do stories that we were enjoying, and none of us, I think, expected the business to last. And probably if the Superman movie had not come out in 75 and 77, I guess it was, or 78, probably the comic book business would have gradually died off and become kind of a backwater. The whole DC implosion in 78 was because the parent corporation didn't think that comics had any future.
Right.
So why invest money in publishing new titles? So we were, when the noose is hanging over your head, you tend to, say, well, what the hell? Let's just have some fun. Let's do some stuff that we want to do. And that was kind of our attitude, and that's why you had that enormous burst of creativity in the 70s, because all of us sort of had nothing to lose.
Going for broke.
Yeah, really.
Well, going back into 72, you actually brought in Dracula into the Marvel Universe, into Tomb of Dracula. What were some of the challenges you had with bringing a known, iconic, like horror character like that into a superhero Marvel kind of realm?
Well, one thing that we tried to do initially was treat the horror titles, like Tomb of Dracula, Swamp Thing, Man Thing, as a kind of an offshoot of the Marvel Universe, so that we didn't immediately tie them in. I think the main character that had a kind of a supernatural aspect that was tied into the Marvel Universe was Morbius. And he was more like a traditional supervillain in a lot of ways. Even though he was a vampire, he was a kind of a super vampire. But Dracula, we tried to treat it in a fairly straightforward fashion. Gene Colan did the art and did it in his usual semi-realistic, noirish sort of look. And the goal was to I guess, treat it as a Marvelized version of that genre, but not specifically as a Marvel comic, if you know what I mean. So we were trying to spread the Marvel publishing brand around, but not necessarily introduce Marvel characters into other environments. Try to write them like Marvel stories, with a Marvel sensibility of character-based continuing dramas, with a kind of a soap opera-ish aspect. But we were not trying to, tie them like we weren't planning a Dracula Fantastic Four crossover. Although I'm sure later that kind of thing took place. I kind of lost track of it after a while.
Now, have you read anything of any of your titles that you co-created from some of the more some of the writers now?
Well, I read Gail Simone's initial run on Fury of Firestorm when they revived that last year. And I followed some of what Jeff Johns was doing with some of the characters in Justice League and Justice Society, Power Girl and Steel and so on. And it's always fun to see. I mean, I loved what Stephen Grant did with the Punisher. So it's. But once you put characters out there, you cease to have any real claim over them. It's like you build the garden, and you plant the garden, and other people come along and pick the flowers and fertilize it, and add their own landscaping ideas, which is all great. That's how you keep things flowing and alive.
Well, if you had a choice, I mean, let's take the Punisher, for example. If you could choose any writer to write it, who would you choose now?
Wow, today. Well, I'm not as familiar now with who's writing comics. 10 years ago, I could have answered that. I mean, I don't know.
Well, let's go 10 years.
Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, the people that I would want to have written the characters did. Frank Miller did write the Punisher, for example. So there's that. I mean, it's like people who I like today. Brian Michael Bendis. I mean, I love his work. He's done attacks on that character in his own way. Mark Miller certainly would be great, and has done great work on the Punisher. Garth Ennis obviously has done great work. So it's most of the people you would think of have had their crack at it. So it's not like there's somebody waiting out there that I'm desperate to see what their take would be. I wouldn't want to crack back at it myself, at this point. But it's I don't know that I'd necessarily have anything new to say.
What about other media, like the movies, for example? Punisher had 3 different movies. Were you involved in any of those movies whatsoever?
No, in fact, I've made I made a vow to myself that I would never watch them because I don't receive any credit or money. So why would I want to? Although I have been interviewed for the DVDs, which is surreal and strange, but it's fine. I actually years ago when I was divorced, I was floundering around dating. This is my mid-30s. I was dating some women in the business, the film business, and this was when I was more active in it. And one of them was an agent who was working for ICM at the time. And in that, we went out to dinner, and in that kind of initial getting to know you, seeing if you have something in common conversation, she was trying to come up with something that we might have in common. She said, "Oh, well, you used to work in comics, right?" I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, we're working on a project right now. We've got an actor who is up for a part in a movie based on a Marvel comic." And oh, really? What would that be? And she started to describe the comic, and I realized it was the Punisher, and I like went psychotic because I'm like, this is my character that nobody even bothered telling me was being picked up for a movie, and I knew that I was not going to be receiving any money from it, and I just went into this long rant about those bastards over there, and this poor woman is like sitting in the back, it's just like pushing her chair slowly away from the table. It's like as this guy is going off, oh, those sons of bitches, Well, I'm a lot calmer these days.
Now that was the first Punisher movie.
Yeah, that was the
Dolph
first
Lundgren.
one with Dolph Lundgren. She was representing Christopher Lambert, who would have been probably even worse. Actually, no. Thinking about it, maybe Christopher Lambert wouldn't have been worse than Dolph Lundgren, because he at least would have had some gravitas to him.
I must
although,
you.
Yeah. Actually, from what I've seen of what's his name, who did the second Punisher movie, Thomas Jane, I think he had a nice look. Although, from what I hear, the movie wasn't all that great.
Actually, I thought it was pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
But
it wasn't bad. It's not great, but I've seen worse.
It was better than the
the
first.
idea of John Travolta as a villain, I've seen him do really good work, and I've seen him do kind of over the top work. So I wasn't sure, about whether that was going to be a good thing or not.
I think the biggest complaint most people had with the film is that it took place in Miami. More people were
Tampa.
that. Yeah, Tampa, but more people were upset about that than anything else about the film. That was the biggest complaint.
Well, he is kind of a New York guy. I mean, he's that urban hunter sort of thing, and Tampa, while it's certainly a big city, is not just doesn't speak to that dark, mean streets kind of film noirish quality. So
now you're also credited with creating Jason Todd as well.
Yes, I did.
And that's a character that's had quite the evolution. I mean, I do have a copy of his first appearance, the story that you wrote, the large one, and when you created him, was he always intended to be a replacement for Grayson?
Well, yeah, Jason Todd was intended to be the new Robin, and the notion was, at that time, I felt, as the Batman writer, that there was something missing from the book without Robin in it. That there was a nice relationship there that sort of toned. This was either before The Dark Knight Returns or around the time of The Dark Knight Returns. But Batman had not become the Batman that we know today. So he was still more of a kind of an in-between, in between the 60s Batman and the post-Frank Miller Batman.
Right.
So that Batman worked well with a partner. But Robin was I think had already become Nightwing by that point, and if he hadn't, he was in the process of becoming Nightwing, but more importantly, was an integral part of the Teen Titans title,
right.
And as such, wasn't really available to me as a character to develop. I couldn't create storylines that would involve Dick Grayson that would compete with whatever storylines were operational in Teen Titans. So I was kind of in a tough situation where I felt Batman needed this this leavening character, this Robin character, but I couldn't use Robin, so I wanted a replacement Robin, and that was the inspiration for bringing Jason Todd in. Now
I'm sorry. Go on.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't think I did necessarily a great job with him, but that was the motive for introducing him.
Personally, I did like the fact, him being the red hair, and in his first appearance with the costume, the circus costume that Don Newton designed. I thought that would have worked very well. I did enjoy that.
Yeah, I think Don did a terrific job with the character. Don was one of the more interesting Batman artists in a lot of ways, because he combined the semi-realistic look, that Gene Colan tried to do, with the more traditional superhero look, and he was a great storyteller.
That was just such a powerful issue. I mean, when you have Robin just go nuts on those crocodiles, was just like, that was an incredible job, Jerry. It really was.
Well, thanks. Glad you liked it.
When the vote came down to off Jason Todd, were you upset by that?
Honestly, no, because I only heard about it after the fact. By that point, I was out writing, I think, feature films or TV or something. Because I think that was late 80s, right? That they killed off Todd.
Yes.
Yeah. I was already over at Marvel. I did some scripts for Marvel for about 2-3 years, and was also transitioning into writing television. So I wasn't really hands-on with DC. And to be honest with you, I think this was the period that I have the least affinity for what DC was doing. It felt to me that I think Alan Moore sort of summed it up really nicely with his Supremes, a year in the life or whatever, his Supremes series, where he did this nice bit about the 90s characters, the 90s superheroes who were all dark and wrist slitting and bleak, and the 80s and 90s. It was a dark period. So yeah, I didn't really like what DC was doing in general, and I thought it was kind of a cheap thrill. And here they are doing it again. So I guess they figured, hey, it worked once. Let's pull up another Robin. Wow, there's a shock.
Moving to your Hollywood career, I mean, you did Fire and Ice, and that was working with Frazetta and Bocci, if I'm not mistaken.
More with Bakshi than with Frazetta, but yes.
I mean, that was pretty good for its time. And then you worked on different TV shows as well.
And we wrote the second Conan film, which was subsequently rewritten, but still it followed our story. And then I did segue into writing television, and where for some reason I became a mystery writer, a writer of police procedurals and mystery stories. I could never get arrested writing. I've never written a single superhero on TV, and could never even get in the door to write a superhero on TV. So go figure that one. But meanwhile, I became the go-to guy for police procedurals, and I have no idea why. Wrote Law and Order and Law and Order Criminal Intent, and various other shows over the years.
Didn't you do some work as well on Hercules?
I did a season on Hercules where I worked with Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi back when they were just breaking into the business, really. And now here they are, the two towering figures of big budget action adventures, superhero, science fiction, fantasy films. And the producers and creators of one of my favorite TV shows. So yeah, that's probably the closest that I got to fantasy in my entire television writing career.
Now, are there any of the creative juices still flowing for the comics? Like, would you want to break back in and create a new character, or do you think?
Well, I'm always open for pretty much anything. I'm not as aggressive as I was back in my teens and 20s and 30s. So I don't go seeking this sort of thing as the way that I did back then. But I've had I've done various things and kind of projects here and there. I do have a project that I'm working on, a young adult novel that I'm expecting will come out this summer. That kind of originally started life as a premise for a comic book series. And then I thought better of it and decided that I wanted to control the whole thing myself. So that was kind of that. And there are some ideas I've had here and there, conversations I've had with other people about various things. But I'm just not that aggressive about it anymore.
Is that because you have lost kind of the love of it, or is it just because?
Oh God, no. It's I still love comics. I still read them and collect them and enjoy them, and every once in a while kick myself and wish I had done something that somebody just did. But I don't want to get into the trenches and fight those fights anymore. The business today is different from the one that I was in. We were, as I said, we thought we were on a Death Star. We thought the thing was going to blow up around us. So we had a lot of freedom and a lot of devil may care, damn the torpedoes sort of nonsense. We didn't have people looking over our shoulders the way that you do today. If I would absolutely go out of my mind having to get storylines approved through the process that you have to go through now. The idea, when there was some project where somebody asked me if I wanted to do something, I said, sure, I'd be happy to. When would you like me to start? And I said, oh, no. We need a promo. We need a premise from you. Then we need, your proposal. We need this. We need that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Either give me the job or don't give me the job. I'm not going to, do an audition for you guys. It's like I've been around for a little while. I think we kind of know how I write. It's like either hire me or don't hire me. I don't care. So I'm just not going to do that. The idea that you'd have to, first of all, I don't know what I would do. That's that's part of the fun to me. I'm sort of like a jazz musician in a certain sense. You give me a basic rhythm, a melody, and I will play a tune and jam with you guys. We'll come up with some stuff and we'll try to make something happen. But if you ask me to sit down and write you a composition of what I'm going to play, I have no interest in that whatsoever. It's like, why would I do that? Can you imagine asking, asking? I mean, first of all, I would never put myself on the same level as the Grateful Dead. But could you imagine asking Jerry Garcia to tell you what he's going to do when he starts strumming his guitar? What? Why would you do that? You want to sit back and watch the guy play. Today, they want to know, how long is that run going to go? How many notes are you going to hit? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? When's the other guy going to come in with his with the horn? When's the other guy going to come in with the piano? Is it going to be a 15-minute riff or a 10? It's like, well, I'm sorry, guys, that's just not how I think. So, given that, I can't see that there is a company that would want to hire me because I'm just not, I'm just not cut out for this kind of straitjacketed thinking,
Would you ever consider doing something like trying like something creator owned or something independent?
Yeah, sure, but again, I'd have to have a I can't imagine somebody wanting to partner with me. You know, it's like, because again, somebody's going to want you to explain what your plan is. And I can honestly say, I don't have a plan. And that's my plan. You know, it's like, you know, you remember when Indiana Jones is in the camp, and the Ark is on the truck, and it's being taken out of the camp, and his girlfriend says to him, "What are you going to do?" He says, "I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along."
Yes.
That's me. I jump on the horse and I go riding out after them, and maybe something will come out. You know, maybe in all likelihood, I'll end up being dragged in the dirt. That's all. That's all I know. But that's part of the fun for me. I mean, that was part of what I tried to do. And this makes me sound like an asshole, I know, but what I did and what we were all doing to some degree or another, I mean, because I was not alone in this, we would throw breadcrumbs out. You know, we would throw out seeds. Sometimes those seeds would take root. Sometimes we'd be able to follow the breadcrumbs back home. But we had no plan. You know, there were people who had plans. I mean, you know, I think there were a handful of writers who, you know, thought, you know, like that they or at least they assured us that they had this master plan for a year from now, you know, where they were going to take a book. But in 1973, that was totally bullshit. You know, we were just trying to get the next issue out. You know, we'd like to think that we had some ideas down the road. You know, I mean, when I took over Spider-Man, I knew that there were certain characters I wanted to use. There were certain stories that were sort of percolating in my head. But honestly, you know, what I really wanted to do was just write that character and see what came up. And that's still how I write when I'm writing for myself. In television, you can't do that. Obviously, you know, you had to come up with storylines and go through approvals and all of that. But they paid me a lot of money to do that. That was a lot of money. And I was willing to really, really go against my instincts to do that. But if I'm going to be writing comic books where I do it because I love it, I would want to, you know, jazz it. I'd want to play some riffs. I wouldn't want to plan it out.
Well,
I could totally understand why nobody would want to hire me to do that.
Well, that brings up a good question. When you were writing one of the first crossovers ever, when you had Superman meet Spider-Man, is that left to your own wiles and ways that you want to do it? Pretty much, yes. In fact, because of the unique circumstances of how that came to be, both companies, well, I think DC was far more interested in having it happen than Marvel was. Marvel, it was sort of like a dare that they lost. Yeah, I'm serious. Stan Lee was having lunch with this hot agent, a guy named David Obst, who Obst had been the agent for Woodward and Bernstein for the book All the President's Men,
right.
And was a very well-connected agent in New York, book agent. And Stan wanted to start selling some books, you know, that he was, I think he was pitching his autobiography or something. And Obst was, you know, something of a comic book fan, and he was saying, well, you know, one thing that you never understood is why Marvel and DC had never done a crossover. You know, it just seemed natural to him to do something like that. And Stan said, oh, well, it would never happen. You know, it could never happen because the two companies would never cooperate, you know, never make that happen, you know. And Obst said, well, you know, if I could make it happen, would you agree to it? And Stan said, well, sure, you know, thinking it would never happen. Well, Obst made it happen because he went to Carmine, and Carmine Infantino, who was the publisher at DC, was a very competitive guy. I mean, he was an aggressively competitive guy against Marvel. In fact, you know, that's why he got Jack Kirby. That's why he hired me away from Marvel. he wanted to sort of stick his finger in Stan's eye as hard as he possibly could. And so when this guy came to him and said, Stan said that, there's no way that you would ever agree to do this, Carmen was like, oh, yeah? I'll do it. And so it became this book that both companies ended up doing as on a dare. And I had just been hired by DC, and Carmine, again, to stick his finger in Stan's eye, put me in charge. And I was like, oh, okay, this sounds like fun. And neither side wanted to deal with it. So it was basically me and Roy Thomas to a degree, because Roy was sort of had his foot halfway out the door at Marvel at that point. Anyway, and he was made the consultant on the book, and he basically said, do whatever you want. and Ross Andrew. And Ross and I plotted it together, doing it like in 4 or 5 page chunks. So we didn't quite know where the book was going to end up. Can you imagine today Marvel and DC ever collaborating on a project that didn't go through 15 layers of approval and coordination and, passing it through the presidents of Disney and the president of Warner's Communication and everybody having to sign off, and lawyers and, your firstborn children, and none of that, would make it possible to do what we did today. So it was the Wild West. I'm so glad, that I had the opportunity to be around in those days doing that stuff, because you could never do any of this today. It's just the spontaneity has been absolutely drained out of it.
And the one thing is, and I always look at it, I've never been a true comic book fan per se, because I don't know the ins and outs of comic books, but I always have a certain respect for the creators of, the Punishers, the Spider-Mans and stuff like that. And I think one of the things that gets lost in the shuffle is guys like you who created these characters, and people forget who you are. It's the same way with music and movies and everything else, but it's nice to have somebody like you on our show to show our appreciation to the older generation that helped make the business what it is today. And if you had any advice for anybody who's writing or drawing today, what would be the biggest advice you would give them?
Well, there are 2 kinds of advice. There'd be the practical business advice, which would be own your own stuff. Don't sell your rights to anything. You can rent it out. That's always good. But keep your property. But the other, and I think more important thing, is to do it because you love doing it. Be passionate about what you do. Don't do it because it's a job. There are plenty of jobs where you can make a living. I mean, obviously in an economy like ours, that's kind of a specious thing to say, but the truth is, if you have ability, you can probably find work. But doing something like comics or films or books or music or anything that involves communicating what's in your soul, it should come totally from your passion. It should come because you love doing it, and not because somebody else is telling you this is what needs to be done. If you find yourself in a position where somebody is telling you what needs to be done, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing it? If you're doing it for a paycheck and that's all you really care about, there are many, many more lucrative ways to make a paycheck. If you're doing something like comics, it's because you're passionate about it. And if you're passionate, then don't let anybody tell you what to do. That would be my advice. one of two ways. Either be a sellout and make as much money as you can, in which case I advise you going into television like I did, or love it to death and be willing to starve, or find the happy middle ground where you've got a passionate project that other people are equally passionate about supporting. I was just one of my favorite comic book artists, I wouldn't say comic book artist, but one of my favorite artists in this kind of field today is a guy named Aaron Diaz, who does a webcomic called Dresden Kodak. And he just had a Kickstarter campaign. Now, Kickstarter is great, right? And we've all heard the stories of people who've made tons of money. Well, he wanted to put out a book version of his webcomic, and his Kickstarter goal was $30,000. At last count, his Kickstarter is at $400,000.
Good gosh.
Yeah. So do what you love. You will get back from the universe, what you're supposed to get. Maybe if it's not any good, you won't get anything back. That's for sure. But that's true in life in a lot of ways, right? It's like you can't get back more than what it's worth. But if it's really worth something, if you've got a true voice and a true passion, you're gonna do okay. Don't sell yourself short. That would be my advice.
So basically, if you believe in your product, then other people will believe in it too.
If it's good. Now, honestly, there are people who believe in their product and it's crap. But that's okay too. The universe will let you know. And then, hopefully you'll not be one of those people who's wandering the streets, talking for your, to the people in the sky. But, that's fine. Maybe that's where you need to be too. But honestly, when you sell out because you're afraid that you're not going to do it, that you're not going to make it otherwise, you're losing the whole reason that you should be doing it. And you're probably not going to get any better results than if you just stuck to your guns and did what you wanted to do. That's whatever wisdom I have, at age 60. It's like. But don't pay any attention to me. I drank Boilermakers when I was 16 years old. So,
well, Jerry, just to hear what you're saying, though, it's like I said, to offer that kind of knowledge to this generation and anything in the future. It's inspirational. Hell, I've grown up reading maybe 3/4 of the people I've ever read are your characters alone. So just to hear you speak and to find alone is very inspirational to me. And I know Mike is trying to do something for himself as well. So that's hearing these words from like yourself and our past guests really helps us into getting to that ground and saying, hey, we're gonna bunker down, we're gonna do this. This show started with just a bunch of guys talking and saying, let's just do a little web show, and here we are now 27 shows in, and the passion is not left and it's still there. And hearing people talk, and especially like I said, people we look up to like yourself, it really helps us and appreciate it.
Well, good, because honestly, guys, you guys are in a much better place creatively than my generation was. You have many, many more opportunities than we did. We had 2 companies that we could work for, and we were working in a business that we thought was dying. So you have the opportunity to create your own universe, your own creative universe. Do you know the YouTube videos that are put out by this? There's this guy whose name is escaping me right now, and I feel bad about this, but he does these fabulous little 5-minute action videos. He's with stunts. They're usually game based. Well, he took this and he ended up turning it into these projects. Kept building, and there's, like, as I say, 5-minute YouTube videos. They kept building, and he now has a series on Netflix that I can't say that he's going to make a fortune doing it, but he's doing what he loves, and it's working out for him. You know, you don't have to play the man's game. Is all I'm saying anymore. Don't sell it to the man. So you guys it's great. This is a good example. Doing this podcast. Back in the day, Roy Thomas did his alter ego fanzine, and he reached maybe 3,000 people. But on the basis of that fanzine, or I'm sorry, what am I saying? 3,000? He would have died if he'd reached 3,300 probably. 300 people if he was happy. Today he reaches a lot more than 3,000. Because he still does it. But on the basis of that, he got a break into the comic book business, which at that time, was a little bit more wild and Wild West, as I say, than it is today. But in the same sort of way, you guys doing what you're doing creatively with a podcast is a way of getting your voice heard and building an audience, building people who will, follow you in your future productions. It's all good.
The great thing is, Jerry, is we look up to you as one of our heroes because of what you created, but at the same time, you're very humble about it. And, we call you a hero and you call yourself just a writer.
Yeah, you really don't find that. I mean, I don't want to name names or anything, but there's a lot of the new people that are out there today aren't as humble as somebody like you, who's, there's a lot, there seems to be a lot more ego.
Well, there is, but to be fair to them, part of that is that they have to do that. There has to be more self-promotion than there was when I was around, just to get heard. Because there's many, many more voices. I mean, part of the flip side to what I was saying about how you have many more opportunities is that you also have many, many, many more competitors. I had like 5 guys, that I was competing with. And by the way, we were all at each other's throats. And we all wanted to see each other. We were all trying to one-up each other and trying to be better than each other. But there was kind of a turning point, I think, in the early 80s when particularly people like Frank Miller came along. And Miller, I think, is a great, terrific artist, and I'm not trying to denigrate him, but he was one of the very first iconic writer-artists who became sought after because of who he was, if you know what I mean.
Right.
He's, when there was no reason for DC Comics to publish Ronin, for example, other than the fact that Frank Miller did it,
Right.
Because there was no market for it. I mean, who would have published, there was nothing, there was no way to predict that would be a success. So that's when things really changed. Some people like me, I had the good fortune of the people that I worked with were partly from the prior generation. The people who I looked up to were people like Kurt Swan and Gardner Fox and Stan Lee, although Stan isn't quite a self-promoter. But he's a humble self-promoter in a lot of ways because, while he will blow his own horn, he also blows it with the self-knowledge that he's full of crap. It's like, I love about him. He's like, he's the original, smile and stand. He's like, with a wink and a nod that he's that he's that we're all in on the joke that here we are. We're celebrating a guy who writes comic books. But for many of the guys that I knew when I was breaking in, who were my collaborators. I mean, I worked with people like Ross Andrew, who was 20 years older than I was, and Ross was a very humble guy, a very modest guy, and a tremendous artist, but not somebody who was ever going to be swarmed at a fan table. He was never going to be swarmed like Frank Miller was going to be swarmed. So those are the guys I identified with. But people like Frank Miller have to fight other people like Frank Miller. You know? So, you know, they have to be more arrogant. You know, they have to be more aggressive and more egotistical. But honestly, I think if you got them alone, you know, and you managed to get them to drop their guard, they would tell you that they feel incredibly lucky, you know, to be able to do the thing they love doing. I just don't have any. I just don't have a dog in the fight anymore. So, you know, for me, I can tell you, I'm an incredibly lucky guy. You know, I got to write comic books, which is the thing I wanted to do when I was 12 years old. How many people get to do that? You know.
Well, Jerry, we really appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us. It was really great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. This is what happens when you get somebody like me on. I'll just chat.
Trust me, we loved it. We really did.
And that's okay with us.
Yeah.
One last question. I've not read it, but maybe you can give us a spoiler. Who wins, Spider-Man or Superman?
Well, I'll tell you this. You know, in our effort to be very conscious of the fact that we were writing a book that was going to represent both companies, we made sure that every single punch that was thrown was received and thrown back. Nobody wins. Nobody loses. Everybody gets whacked once. You know. If you go through that book, it's practically a master class in balance. Each character gets the same number of panels, the same number of close-ups, the same number of foreground figures versus background figures. It's pretty amazing, and I'm amazed that nobody's ever actually sat down and analyzed it, because I think you could really you could make an interesting case for it as a master class. And in this case, I give that totally to Ross Andrew, a master class in artistic balance.
Now, if you had your choice and you could have picked who won, who would have won?
The Hulk.
All right, Jerry. Before we let you go, first thank you for Demo Goblin, one of my all-time favorite Spider-Man characters.
Okay.
And last, when you were talking about, you know, things that your love for comics and doing things, we're not going to get into the turmoil nowadays. We have a lot of artists leaving comics and upset about direction of creative writing. I think today's age could take a huge lesson for how you guys used to do things, and I think it would probably improve the comics today if they went back to that mentality and format. So they need to learn the lessons from you guys. Except
that I got to tell you this. It does pain me tremendously when I see, I mean, as I say, I've never seen a Punisher film. And I don't blame any guy who wants to maintain his ownership, you know, or at least some acknowledgement in his work. So these guys, if they're leaving because they feel like they're being taken advantage of, I can empathize. I was lucky that I had another way to go. I mean, I could write television, where, you know, as I say, they paid me well to take advantage of it. But, you know, with rare exceptions, do you get taken properly care of in comics? DC is going out of its way right now, and let me give them some credit. They're going out of their way to acknowledge me and to give me some financial recompense for characters like Count Vertigo and Felicity Smoke, you know, who are appearing on The Arrow, and they've done right by me in a lot of ways. So it's not that the comic book companies can't do better by their people. It's that they don't. But back in the 60s and the 70s, nobody expected anything to come of this. So we didn't, it's not like we were saying, oh, yes, you can take our ideas and use them in many fine different brands of multimedia, and we're perfectly fine with that. We didn't expect them to do anything with our stuff, you know. When I wrote the Punisher story and got paid $300 for that issue, that's all the money I ever expected to get from it, and I was okay with it. today, if you're going to create a character and you know that this character could turn into, you know, a multi-million-dollar franchise for Warner Brothers, do you really think that it's unreasonable to want a piece of that? I don't think so. So that's why I say do it for yourself, guys. Anyway, that enough lecture. I'm sorry.
It was great.
Well, Jerry, thank you again so much for spending an hour with us.
I'm always happy to, as I say, to talk to anybody.
We really appreciate it. Well, that's it for this show. For Mike, Dave, Jay, and myself, this has been the Fanboy Factor. Night all.
Good night, guys.